I was working at the station that morning, and our receptionist out front brought his letter back to the newsroom, gave it to me. This letter says, and this is a quote, "How many more people do I have to kill before I get my name in the paper?" That's a quote that you don't forget.
Five of the most prolific serial killers in American history were all operating at the same time.
John Wayne Gacy's
Ted Bundy is still alive.
BTK.
Jeffrey Dahmer.
Green River Killer.
This was the golden age of serial killing.
What sets this group of men apart is that they come across as being fairly normal.
John Wayne Gacy would hire young men from the Chicago community. He's searching for victims.
My brother says me and this boy are working together and we're digging around Gacy's house. Well, it ended up they were digging their own graves.
Police were unable to connect Gacy to these crimes.
Rader had left a book in the library, and inside that book was a letter.
He wants to give himself a brand, and he says, "My name is BTK for bind, torture, and kill."
And now he just needs to take it up a notch and make it an even riskier behavior.
You will find a homicide at Suite 43, South Perkins, Nancy Fox. Convicted Utah kidnapper Theodore Bundy has escaped.
It made the county look really dumb that he could jump out of the window and escape.
With guys like Bundy, you have a success, and then another, and then another. And pretty soon, you start to believe you're invincible.
Serial killers like Bundy, Gacy, and Rader would get this additional thrill from this cat and mouse game that they're playing with law enforcement. So they're committing murder, they're committing rape, these vicious crimes that have this power dynamic. And then they're getting an extra boost of power dynamic by being able to mess with the minds of law enforcement.
Streets of Aspen are safe again. Suspected multiple murderer Theodore Bundy is back in custody after an absence of nearly 7 days.
After his first escape in Aspen, I visited him in jail in Glenwood, and that's a more modern jail, and supposedly a more secure jail. I noticed when I was visiting him there that Ted, who was never heavy, had lost a lot of weight, lots.
He was not eating much, working out, and working on losing weight.
He found out that the ventilation system in his jail cell was just a 12-inch grate.
That opening led into the second floor where the jailer lived. His plan was that when he was certain the jailer was out, he would climb up that opening in the ceiling, get into the jailer's apartment, and then escape, which is exactly what he did.
The clever convict crawled through the ceiling of his cell and escaped again.
Ordered on a Houdini escapade. Ground units, helicopters, and dogs have been searching for Bundy. Search reaches all over the West right now. It's going to be a long time before Theodore Bundy is behind bars again.
I helped send him health food. I helped get him a telephone in his cell. If I hadn't have helped him get skinny, unbeknownst to me, he probably wouldn't have fit through that 12-inch square. I've always felt bad about some of the things I did, but as a defense lawyer, I did what I'm supposed to do. So Ted's in Ann Arbor, Michigan before they announced he's escaped. He was in a bar watching the Rose Bowl when a tickets thing came across the thing and said, "Ted Bundy just escaped."
Back in the 1970s, you did not have to show ID when you bought a ticket. You didn't have to go through any kind of security checks at the airports. You could get on trains and planes and buses. And he immediately went to places where the publicity about him wasn't as pervasive. We knew there would be bad ending. And we did everything we could to help law enforcement throughout the country know that there was a killer on the loose. But it doesn't get to everybody, and it doesn't really get to Florida where he ends up.
When crime started to stretch across state lines, law enforcement was at a real disadvantage because we just didn't have that ability to communicate with anything other than actually having to make a phone call or with the teletype system. So it's really an antiquated way of communicating.
The only news you got back in that day was at 6 o'clock. So nobody on the East Coast knew who Bundy was. As far as what was going on the West Coast back in the 70s, they might have well been on another planet as far as I was concerned.
I was home and sleeping with my family. My phone rang. They said, "Sheriff, we've got murders and injuries at the Chi Omega house at the Florida State campus." I said, "I'll be there." When we arrived at the scene, one of the women was being rolled out on a stretcher. As I stood there, I said a prayer for her. I didn't know if she was alive or seriously injured at the time.
Police say he simply walked in through an unlocked door. They say he was armed with a heavy oak log.
He went from one room, beat badly one victim, crushing the skull, dislocating the teeth, breaking the jaw. He left that room and went to another room. The same thing occurred. And then the third room, where there were two young ladies, he was beating on one as the other one was waking up from the noise, turned to her, and then was beating on her. And when he knew he needed to get out, he went down the stairway, but little did he know, one young lady was coming in that night. She saw a side view of him.
I see a man at the doorway with his hand on the doorknob.
Yes.
He's in a hurry.
Would you say this is a nice-looking man?
Yes.
He clubbed and then strangled to death 20-year-old Lisa Levy and 21-year-old Margaret Bowman. At least one of them was raped. Then he brutally beat Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner.
I got a radio call while at the scene of the Chi Omega house saying, "Sheriff, there's noises coming from a duplex," which was only about 6 blocks away. He couldn't leave it at what he had done. He was in a frenzy. And that's why he had to go to another location. He was not satisfied. He was like a shark, just eating. The law enforcement presence in the area, the patrol cars, the lights, and yet we had this going on down the street. When the deputy walked in, there was the young lady and a pool of blood on the floor. We were not sure of the makeup of a person that would do that. Could the same person go no further than 6 blocks and not be able to contain themselves enough?
The cases in Florida were somewhat different from the cases in Seattle. In Chi Omega in Florida, you had hugely compulsive, repeated murders at the same time. The cases in Florida evidenced for us that the killer was really on a rampage, that there was something in him at this point that was causing him to commit these acts in a crazed state.
He was really out of control by now. I mean, to attack 5 women in one night, that was something he'd never done.
I remember distinctly as I'm driving, I got a phone call. There were only 2 telephones in cars at that time. I had a telephone in my car, and Governor Graham, governor of the state of Florida, and it was from Colorado, investigators there saying there had been an escape. They heard about our murders, and they said this man murders women about that age. And I asked for a name, and they said his name is Ted Bundy.